Rhodes University Associate Professor and Head of the Department of Political and International Studies is author Professor Siphokazi Magadla released her new book, Guerrillas and Combative Mothers. The book offers a first-hand account of women's participation in the armed struggle against apartheid from 1961 to 1994 and their lives in a democratic South Africa. It is based on 40 life stories of women who fought with the rural Poqo, the military wing of the PAC, the exile-based uMkhonto Sizwe, and the military wing of the ANC, and the township-based self-defense units. Well, Professor Magadla is on Zoom to tell us more. Professor Magadla, very good morning to you. A warm welcome to Morning Live. First of all, give us a brief synopsis of what the book is about and what the inspiration behind this book is.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Lebu. I'm very happy to be here. The book is called Guerrillas and Combative Mothers, Women in the Armed Struggle in South Africa. The inspiration behind the book is really wanting to understand what women did in the liberation for South Africa against apartheid. So today, the 8th of April, in fact, is the day that the ANC and the PAC were banned in 1960. This moment is understood as the hand to the armed struggle. So after the Sharpeville massacre, what followed was the banning of these liberation movements, who then adopted armed strategy as one of the strategies that they were going to use to defeat apartheid. So when we look at this period of history, we know the names of people like Dr. Nelson Mandela, who was the first commander of uMkhonto Sizwe, but rarely do we know the names of women. So last week we marked the anniversary of the hanging, the execution of Solomon Mahlangu. But in terms of the MK women, for instance, that were also captured and tortured and murdered by the apartheid security branch, we barely know those names. So if I think of two names, for instance, I can think of Nokuthula Simelane, who was captured in Johannesburg in September 1983. I think of Philan Ndwandwe, who was also captured in Swaziland in 1988 at the age of 23, the very same age that Solomon Mahlangu was when he was hanged in 1979. But we don't hear their names. So, and in fact, what Minister Thandi Modise has called this, she has called it a deliberate brushing out of women in the history of the armed struggle. And she was one of those guerrillas who joined after the 1976 uprising. So the book really looks at what women did from the very beginning of the armed struggle, from 1961 right to the end in 1994, looking at what women did in the rural areas during the time of what is known as the Poqo insurrections. I focus on the role of Poqo women in Umtata, in an area known as Umkanduli. I also then look at what women of uMkhonto Sizwe did, focusing especially on the period of the 1970s and the 1980s. And then I look at what women did in the 1980s during the period that is known as the township uprisings of the 1980s. This is, this period that is known as the time of ungovernability or the time of the People's War. And the book really shows that women were present and active in all of these periods, these decades of the armed struggle, from 1961 right to 1994, and then also follow what their lives looked like after 1994. So that is really the inspiration behind the book, to show that, in fact, the gender equality that we enjoy today, it is a result of the role, the active participation of women in all of the anti-apartheid struggle.
I mean, speak to us about the extensive research that went into this book, and what are some of the lessons that came for you that were eye-opening as you were conducting this research?
So this project, as you said, is 40 interviews that I started. First one, in 2010, I had the opportunity of interviewing Minister Thandi Modise, as well as a retired Major General Zikimemela Motumi. And they were really talking to me about, for a documentary project, talking to me about the role of women in the security sector transformation of the South African Defence Force and as well as the police. And so it is that those interviews that inspired me then to consider what women had done, during the liberation struggle. So this is research is informed by interviews from 2013 to 2014, as well as 2018 to 2019. Some of the people, and you've shown their images that are interviewed, are elders such as retired Major General Jackie Sedibe, who was the highest ranked combatant or guerrilla of uMkhonto Sizwe, who became the highest ranked Major General of the South African National Defence Force, the highest ranked woman of the SANDF. Mm-hmm. And so, yes, and so really it was to understand, what women did when they left, why they were how they were politicized while they were in South Africa, for those who then left, how they were politicized, how they came to learn about the armed struggle, but also the training that they received. And so the book really speaks to the specific experience of the MK women that were trained in various camps in Angola. Mm-hmm. So I look at the type of training that they received, the daily life in the camps, and I also look at the topic of combat. So one of the big questions in both academic literature as well as in public culture is people asking, did women really fight? I teach a course at Rhodes on the armed struggle, and I get an email from one of the students, and she says, but ma'am, did the women really fight? So I attack this question, I engage this question by looking at the role of people like Major General Jackie Sedibe in Operation Vula. I look at these twin sisters, Mamtotsi Memela and Ntsiki Memela, specifically on Mamtsiki Memela's role in Operation Vula, as well as Zukuam Velase's role in Operation Vula. Mm-hmm. And so it's really looking at those very specific details, as well as then in terms of the women in the township uprisings. I look at what women did, to support these, what are known as paramilitary forces that saw themselves as carrying the mandate of uMkhonto Sizwe, these self-defense units that were confronting, the SANDF, the South African Defence Force, in the South African townships, at funerals, in schools, in their homes. And so that is really the extent of the book. But also then I also explore why some of them chose to then join the new Defence Force, and some of the many reasons that informed the other veterans' decisions not to join the South African National Defence Force, so the new Defence Force. Mm-hmm.
Professor Magadla, the other thing in the book is also about how they are reintegrated back into society after what they had to endure. What are some of the aspects that you touch on regarding reintegration into society for these powerful women?
A very wonderful question. And so part of the integration, I look at family. Some of these veterans, they left children behind. So what did it mean, for those who had been away for 10 years, some 27 years, to be integrated back into their families? Did they find their parents still alive? And if they didn't, what did integration actually mean for them? I look at, the kinds of jobs, the kinds of qualifications that they had, how did they then map out their professional lives? One of them, Nkosazana Tlaba, she makes the point that, when they defeated apartheid, she didn't feel the need to join the SANDF because she didn't want to age as a soldier. So she could map out a new life for herself. She had been trained as a nurse, so she became involved in the health sector. I look at people like Totse Memela, who's the current CEO of SASA, and the kinds of qualifications that then they attain to then play the kinds of roles that they do today. Of course, the other big debate, about the integration process is really around who had the choice to be integrated. So the book shows that it's only the women that were trained in exile that had the option, in fact, to be integrated into the new Defence Force. So the Poqo women that I talk about didn't have that option because they were not trained formally in guerrilla warfare, as well as the mothers that I speak to in places like Gqeberha, who were parts of the self-defense units. And the veterans, they see this as an injustice, because they argue that there were many ways that both women and men were involved in the armed struggle. It's not only through military training that one became active. And for that matter, other scholars make the argument that those who were in places like Angola actually never used that training. The people that used their skills, really drawing from whatever they could, are the ones who were at the heart of the matter, in the South African townships and in the homelands.
Yeah.
So there's a whole debate about, who is recognized in South Africa as a military veteran. And for those who were inside South Africa, they see it as an injustice that they were not included in this formal process.
Yeah.
But for those that were included, such as MK and some from APLA, they also saw themselves as having been swallowed into the old culture of the white South African Defence Force. So I explore that through women.
All right, Professor Magadla, thank you so much for talking to us. Thank you for the book and your work in that book, Professor Siphokazi Magadla, speaking to us about the latest book that she's released, and it is titled Guerrillas and Combative Mothers.